The origins of the Murdering Suns harkens back to a great period of upheaval in the Imperium's history. This chapter was created during the tumultuous era of the Nova Terra Interregnum, sometime during the 35th millennium. During this time, the Imperium was split into twin interstellar empires when the Ur Council of Nova Terra denounced the High Lords of Terra and claimed rule over the Segmentum Pacificus. This age was marked by ongoing civil wars for reunification and disputes over the old trade terms, tithes, and wavering allegiances. During this period, multiple foundings of Space Marine chapters occurred during the centuries-long period of civil unrest. One such founding was the 11th founding, which occurred sometime between the early to mid-centuries of this millennium. Few records remain surrounding this founding, which was believed to have been created to try to counteract the rapid erosion and contradiction of the Imperium's borders during this period of political and military division. The High Lords of Terra gave carte blanche to the newly created chapter to bring the rebellious planets back into the Imperial fold, and to ensure that planetary governors thinking of declaring independence reconsidered the wisdom of such actions. The Murdering Suns took this task to heart to reimpose the rule of imperial law to the faltering galaxy. This uncompromising, brutal chapter descended upon world after world, only nominally still part of the Imperium, and brought both bolter and blade to those that would turn from the light of the Emperor. Planetary governors were given an ultimatum: wholeheartedly submit to the Imperium or suffer dire consequences. Those that resisted were made brutal examples of, becoming bloody public exhibitions to the folly of resistance. The Murdering Suns took it upon themselves to do terrible things necessary to keep the status quo, to ensure that the Imperium wouldn't slip further into anarchy and rebellion, protecting humanity from its own dark nature. The chapter did its duty, knowing full well that the price they paid was to be feared, loathed, and reviled by the very people they were sworn to protect. Though undoubtedly effective, the Murdering Suns' brutal ways were a source of friction with many of the other, more Codex Astartes-oriented chapters, with many refusing to fight alongside such barbarous Astartes. During their early years of existence, the Murdering Suns quickly came to be seen as harbingers of doom, arriving as they did just ahead of either an invading imperial crusade or as literal angels of death, bringing swift and bloody vengeance. Their growing reputation was such that soon the mere rumour of the arrival of their chapter fleet in system caused whole sectors to surrender wholesale rather than face the cruel retribution of these vicious killers. During the first few centuries of their existence, the Murdering Suns garnered a dark reputation as being notoriously bellicose in temperament and bloody-handed in the execution of their duties, concerned only with bringing the message of swift and merciless retribution to those who would dare to defy the Emperor. They wholeheartedly believe that their methods, though cruel and extreme, were necessary in order to bring those that had fallen into darkness back into the light. Since that time, the Murdering Suns have continued to tirelessly prosecute any enemy who might threaten the Imperium, carrying out terrible and public displays of brutality against those who would oppose them, and subjugating those who would ally themselves with such apostates or rogues. Only when their enemies are slain, their forces scattered, their fortresses cast down, and their people made destitute, do the Murdering Suns consider their duty done. The Murdering Suns believe they are the retributors of the Emperor, created for the sole purpose of bringing swift, merciless justice to those that would dare transgress against him and the laws of the Imperium. They reserve a special hatred for those who reject the Emperor and embrace something else in his place, be it an apostate, a rebellious planetary ruler, or more grievously, foul Xenos, or the servants of the ruinous powers. The eradication of such heresy is a prime goal of the Murdering Suns. When the High Lords of Terra have identified a world whose faith has been found wanting, and turned their backs on both the Imperium and the Guard Emperor, the murdering sons are unleashed. Such crimes require not simply crushing, but retribution. These actions are well suited to this chapter. The murdering sons feel it is their sacred duty to drag those found wanting back from the shadows of ignorance and discord and into illumination. Imperial law is clear. The Emperor rewards thoroughness. If there is the slightest suspicion of involvement of such heresy, they must be purged through any means necessary. When it involves an entire world, the murdering sons are not so discerning as to single out just those responsible. In their eyes, all are guilty by association. The sons show no mercy and offer no quarter. Their methods often lead to the destruction of entire cities and, if need be, entire worlds. Better a dead world than one that does not bow to the Emperor, or worse, serves his enemies and the enemies of all mankind. The murdering sons have no moral compunction performing the most barbarous acts in order to carry out the will of the Council of the High Lords. Their drive to enact retribution overrides all the other impulses within them. It is not known if this is a result of some particular curse of their blood or if it was intentionally engineered into their gene seed. Their ways and methods of war are geared towards the righteous drive to punish the guilty. Most disturbing of all is the murdering sons' proclivity for torture and outright murder. They believe that the terrifying acts of murder and mayhem that they perpetrate in the Emperor's name are coldly calculated means to an end. In their skewed moral view, there is no such thing as innocence or guilt. The sons believe justice is neither warm nor caring, and those who are judged and found wanting only deserve swift retribution, as cold and dispassionate as the sharpened edges of their flaying knives. Serving as judge, jury, and executioners, the murdering sons willingly enact their bloody form of justice against those whose crimes are deemed particularly egregious in the eyes of the Senatorium Imperialis. The brutal punishments carried out by the murdering sons are designed to be their most visceral and personal, which include systematic mutilation, flaying, flogging, crucifixion, and dismemberment. One of their more brutal traditions is the practice of habitually wearing totem relics of significant enemies upon their battle plate. They are also known to adorn their armor and vehicles with the bones, skulls, and sometimes flayed skins of those who have resisted the rule of the Imperium. A psychological ploy utilized by the murdering sons to great effect. These grisly displays send a clear message to those yet to be punished that a similar fate awaits them. Despite the murdering sons' nature and their barbaric reputation, the chapter and its battle brothers have been observed to be seemingly almost incredibly loyal. On the rare occasion when they have been encountered, most of the murdering sons have been observed to show reverence towards the imperial creed and places of imperial worship. Many have also been observed to make the habit of carrying devotional items such as prayer scrolls or a personal reliquary containing votive items such as the ashes of fallen comrades as a talisman. However, all this stands in contrast to the savagery they show to their enemies. Those who've had dealings with this chapter have also observed that the murdering sons are respectful and quite formal when dealing with other agents of imperial authority, such as members of the ecclesiarchy or the Inquisition. However, this does not mean that the murdering sons are subservient to these authorities, as they only recognize the authority of the Guard Emperor and those who rule the Imperium on his behalf. On rare occasions, this lesson has been learned too late by those who have tried to overstep their emperor-given mandates, usually at great personal cost. Whenever the murdering sons have fought alongside the armies of the Imperium in force, they often display a propensity for being a bellicose and turbulent ally, unpredictable at best and dangerous at worst. Like most of the history of the Dark Era that the murdering sons were created in, the origins of this chapter's gene seed has been lost to time. opportunities to study the Murdering Sun's organs involved have been exceedingly rare, and the chapter themselves are singularly unhelpful in this regard due to their continuous crusades undertaken across the width and breadth of the galaxy. They're required to submit a genetic tithe to the Magus Biologes to ensure the genetic health of a Space Marine chapter and store it for future use for founding new chapters if the need arises. What few samples the Murdering Suns are willing to provide arrive to the Adeptus Mechanicus infrequently. The scant few samples they have received is surprisingly pure, bearing the least evidence of mutation, with all 19 implants functioning with commendable efficiency. The only noticeable trait is that these Astartes tend to show a tendency for moral exoneration and a drive to enact retribution. It is not known if this is a result of the genetic legacy their gene seed was derived from, or whether it was introduced long ago from some unknown genetic stock from one of the several worlds the Murdering Suns recruit from while on crusade. There are no common phenotypes amongst encountered Murdering Suns. It is well documented that the divergence in programming and influence of the Primarch's genotype in the transformation of human to transhuman Astartes that, beyond any other faction, sets the various Space Marine chapters apart from each other. In the case of the Murdering Suns, this factor shows clearly both in temperament and overtly in the psychological. The Murdering Suns display a propensity for the use of violence and calculated, cold-blooded murder in order to achieve their aims. They have a keen understanding of the human psyche and willingly employ such brutal tactics in order to maintain imperial order. When committing such horrible acts, they often display cold indifference when enacting their brutal forms of justice, as cold and uncaring as their ritual flaying knives. Though deemed barbaric and bellicose in nature by many of their fellow Astartes chapter, the Murdering Suns are known to display unequivocal loyalty to both the High Lords of Terror and the Emperor to a fault. Surprisingly, the Murdering Suns adhere strongly to the tenets of the Codex Astartes, despite their barbaric nature. The structure of the chapter follows the Codex somewhat closely, with only a few minor changes and unique units not found in any other chapter. Almost all squads within the chapter utilize a name in place of a simple designation. Squads with a company are therefore referred to by a variety of names, such as revenants, wraiths, or a number of other epithets, often coupled with an indication of hierarchy or honorific: tenebrous wraiths, third revenants, and the seventh tormentors, to name but a few amongst hundreds. The company is the basic strategic deployment within the Murdering Suns chapter, and each squad belongs to a company which might number anywhere between 80 and 100 warriors. Most companies also utilize a title in addition to their numeric designation. The second company, the Bloody Judges; the fifth company, the Wraith Brethren; the eighth company, the Baleful Executioners, and so on. Unlike many chapters, the Murdering Suns will often group multiple companies together, forming individual task forces. This provides the Suns a flexible approach to warfare, which allows the chapter to operate with a high degree of fluidity and to be readily separated into autonomous units or combined into ad hoc formations, as their chapter master dictates. Just as squads and companies bear names to set them apart from each other, so too do the commanders of the chapter adorn their names with secondary monikers and titles. The Murdering Suns have access to a full range of war machines utilized by the Emperor's armies, and even though this chapter favors their particular brutal style of punitive and excoriation operations, they still make use of various Astartes armored vehicles and aerial transports available to them. Due to individual companies often conducting independent operations, the Murdering Suns vehicles are held at the company level. Squadrons operate in the direct support of the company squads. Utilizing Rhino-armored personal carriers and land raiders, the Murdering Suns strike when possible during hours of darkness, preferably at dusk or dawn. The Suns deploy their armored vehicles much in the same way as the chapter deploys as a whole, deploying these supply lines and isolate individual concentrations of enemy troops. They then rapidly deploy individual squads to destroy their chosen targets at their leisure. The chapter also makes use of a standard complement of Thunderhawk and Storm-Talon gunships in order to rapidly deploy individual squads during their planetary assaults. Specialist ranks. Torture Master. The infamous Torture Masters are those veteran battle brothers who specialize in the application and use of torture. This small coterie of specialists are made up of the most coldly dispassionate and darkly imaginative of the Murdering Sun's brethren. As experts of their bloody craft, these specialists are apt at creating invasive punishments that keep their victims alive and lucid far longer than they would wish to be. Utilizing specially selected implements of torture, they are able to carry out a variety of horrific torture techniques that can prolong the agony of their victims many hours or even days. Persecutor Chaplain. These are the chaplains of the Murdering Suns who lead their fellow battle brothers in the morbid punishment rites in which the chapter engages. Persecutor chaplains are often recruited from amongst the torture masters of the chapters. These fearsome individuals are as skilled in the arts of interrogation, torture, and psychological manipulation as most experienced members of the Inquisition's Ordo Hereticus.